Hello and welcome to Lean Reads, the channel that turns powerful books into simple lessons for growth and inspiration. What does it really mean to exist? For Jean-Paul Sartre, life has no ready-made purpose, no divine blueprint. We are born first, and only later do we define ourselves. In today's video, we'll dive into Sartre's bold claim that existence precedes essence. If you'd like to read the full book, the link is waiting for you in the description. Now, let's jump into it. Existentialism Is a Humanism, 1946, is one of Jean-Paul Sartre's most accessible works, written to explain the foundation of existentialist philosophy. In it, Sartre defends the view that human beings have no fixed essence and cannot rely on any supernatural force to provide life's meaning. Humans are free, but with that freedom comes the responsibility to create their own values and act consciously in a world that is absurd and lacking inherent purpose. Jean-Paul Sartre, 1905 to 1980, was a French philosopher, novelist, playwright, and one of the most influential intellectuals of the 20th century. He was renowned for works such as Being and Nothingness, the novel Notia, the short story collection The Wall, and the plays No Exit and The Flies. As a pioneer of the existentialist movement, Sartre left an indelible mark on philosophy, literature, and politics. In 1964, he famously declined the Nobel Prize in Literature, insisting that a writer should not become an institution. Existentialism emerged as a modern philosophical movement shaped by the turbulent history of the 20th century, a time Nietzsche called the death of God and one overshadowed by the trauma of the Holocaust. Yet for existentialists, philosophy was not merely an abstract discipline, but a way of life, echoing the spirit of ancient Greek thinkers. Like Socrates, Sartre believed the most important question was how to live a good life. Based on a lecture delivered in Paris in 1945, Existentialism Is a Humanism offers perhaps the most concise presentation of Sartre's philosophy. Unlike science, which seeks objective truths, Sartre pursued moral truths. He argued that universal facts, such as 2 + 2 = 4, are accessible to all, but only those who live authentically can grasp the deeper truths of existence. The ancient Greeks emphasized discipline, meditation, and physical training as prerequisites for approaching such truths. Sartre, however, placed the emphasis on honesty with oneself, authenticity, and the courage to walk one's own path rather than conform to the crowd. In his view, these ways of living open the door to the ultimate truth of existence, that human beings are responsible for creating meaning in their own lives within an otherwise indifferent universe. Jean-Paul Sartre recalled that he lost his faith at the age of 12. While waiting for a friend at school, he began thinking about God and suddenly concluded, "He does not exist." For Sartre, this was a moment of awakening the clarity of an answer to a great question. From that point onward, he no longer wrestled with the issue. Sartre believed that the pride of a child who thought himself the origin of his own being made it difficult for him to accept the existence of a supreme being. Yet the broader intellectual climate of his time also shaped his views. When Sartre was born in 1905, European intellectuals had already been questioning the role of God for decades. Karl Marx argued that religion was being undermined by economic change, human pursuit of profit, and individual calculation displaced faith from its central position. For Nietzsche, it was science and technology that had eroded religious belief. Questions once reserved for the divine why we exist, or what death means, were increasingly answered by reason and empirical research. Thus, in Nietzsche's words, humanity itself had brought about the death of God. For Sartre, this was not a condemnation of belief, but a historical observation. Atheism, once a minority view, had spread widely and captured much of Europe's intellectual life. Faith, once the cornerstone of morality and guidance, no longer held its former strength. For many in the 19th century, the disappearance of God felt chilling, like a bucket of cold water poured over the soul. The pessimists feared that without God and religious standards, nothing would restrain human behavior. As the Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky warned, if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. Sartre understood this anxiety. He compared the state of existence after God, death, to the grief of losing a loved one, leaving a void where life seems only a faint echo of the past. By the 1940s, after 2 world wars, humanity was indeed searching for meaning amid the collapse of old values. Losing faith, as Nietzsche described, pushed people beyond the boundaries of good and evil into a morally ambiguous existence. Yet this loss also opened the possibility of new beginnings. If there is no divine guide, then humanity itself must take responsibility for being its own guide. In 1945, when Jean-Paul Sartre delivered his famous lecture in Paris, existentialism was widely misunderstood. To many, it seemed like a gloomy literary trend associated with stories of lost souls outcasts, deceivers, and rebels. The stereotype of existentialist writers was that of people living recklessly, sitting in smoke-filled cafes, listening to jazz, and defying middle-class morality. Sartre's lecture was meant to correct this misconception. He argued that existentialism was not a shallow cultural rebellion, but a serious, philosophical doctrine about the nature of human existence. For Sartre, existentialism belongs to the domain of philosophy, specifically ontology, the study of being. Its central thesis is encapsulated in the phrase, "Existence precedes essence." To explain, Sartre used the example of a folding knife. When a craftsman makes it, he already has in mind its form and purpose to cut fruit, trim rope, or carve wood. In this case, the essence of the knife, its design and function, comes before its existence. Those who believe in God imagine humanity in a similar way. God, as the divine craftsman, is thought to have a concept of humanity before creating human beings. Each individual, then, would be the embodiment of that divine idea, just as the knife embodies its predetermined purpose. In this view, human essence precedes existence. But if God is no longer present, if modern thought rejects the idea of a divine being who designed humanity, then the belief that our lives follow a higher plan collapses as well. Sartre argued that in such a situation, humans are no longer bound by any preordained design. We are not born with a fixed essence. Instead, we must create it through our actions and experiences. We are born first, thrown into existence, and only afterward define ourselves. At the start, we are nothing. From this comes Sartre's radical conclusion about freedom. With no God to dictate values or prescribe a way of life, we must make our own choices. And this also means we bear full responsibility for everything we do. Sartre called this condition being condemned to be free. We cannot choose where we are born or the circumstances we face, but once alive, how we live is entirely up to us. We cannot blame an unchangeable human nature or appeal to divine will. Each of us must own our choices and live with their consequences. In other words, we are what we choose to be. In Nausea, the debut novel of French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, readers follow the inner journey of Antoine Roquentin, a man living in a small town in northern France. He begins to confront a strange and unsettling realization. Everything around him is meaningless and arbitrary. One day, sitting on a park bench, Roquentin fixates on the roots of a chestnut tree. At first, it seems like an ordinary, harmless activity. But as he looks more closely, he feels overwhelmed. The world around him becomes unfamiliar. Unreal nothing appears necessary or essential. Suddenly, he is overtaken by nausea, triggered by the recognition that there is no reason why the tree exists, or why anything exists at all. Life, in all its forms, from love and music to crime and revolution, simply is. it has no higher purpose. This realization is so intense that Roquentin contemplates death. Yet even the idea of suicide seems no more meaningful than continuing to live. In both his lectures and his fiction, Sartre used the feeling of nausea to describe the psychological shock of discovering oneself adrift in a universe without direction, purpose, or need for one's existence. He argued that this realization comes when we see that nothing is necessary, everything is contingent, without inherent reason to be one way rather than another. Like fellow existentialist Albert Camus, Roquentin wrestles with the ultimate question: if life has no meaning, why not end it? But like Camus, he realizes that even death holds no special meaning. The solution is not to abandon life, but to face it. Many people cope by filling their days with duties, routines, and distractions to avoid confronting the emptiness within. Sartre believed that most of us fail to recognize our true freedom because we hide from existential anxiety by surrendering to habit. Yet Sartre does not leave us with despair. For him, the absence of predetermined meaning is also an opportunity. Meaning is not found in trees, music, or cities in themselves. It is created through our interaction with them. The streets I walk, the feelings I experience, the projects I pursue, they matter because I live them. Meaning does not lie outside of us. It is distilled from our choices and actions. Seen this way, even the chestnut tree root need not provoke nausea. That reaction occurs when one stands apart from life, merely observing rather than living. By actively engaging in personal projects, a trip, a painting, or in Roquentin's case, becoming a writer, life becomes shaped and connected. Thus, at the end of Nausea, Roquentin resolves to write about his experiences, not to escape his nausea, but to transform it into the raw material of creativity. In doing so, he illustrates Sartre's central point: human beings can create meaning for their own existence. Sartre argued that value does not lie outside us, in objective truths waiting to be discovered, but only exists in human action. Facts, for example, scientific measurements, carry no moral meaning unless placed in the context of human concerns, where people do more than observe, but actually act. For instance, scientists can determine the level of pesticide in drinking water. But whether this fact is good or bad depends on how people interpret it in real-life contexts, protecting the environment, ensuring food security, or balancing economic growth. Likewise, a rock is nothing more than an inert object until it confronts a climber on a mountain trail, where it becomes an obstacle. According to Sartre, when people appeal to events, theories, or external forces to justify their actions, they are often seeking escape from the burden of moral responsibility. One may claim that their behavior was determined by genetics, social, and economic conditions, or the unconscious mind. Yet Sartre maintained that such explanations are attempts to evade accountability for one's own choices. Still, Sartre did not deny the existence of objective conditions beyond our control. We do not choose our family background, our physical bodies, whether strong or disabled, nor the historical era or society into which we are born. This condition he called being thrown into the world. Some are born into privilege, others face oppression or discrimination. Yet Sartre believed that even within these constraints, freedom persists. We always retain the capacity to choose how we respond, to forge our own path from the very reality we inherit. In this sense, freedom of choice can never be stripped away. Even under oppression, the peasant bound by feudal obligations, or the impoverished laborer weighed down by hardship, still has the fundamental freedom to decide, to meet life with kindness or cruelty, resignation or rebellion, bitterness or serenity. Albert Camus, another existentialist philosopher, described this irreducible freedom as an invincible summer that lives within us even in the depths of winter. He illustrated this with the myth of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a stone up a hill, only for it to tumble back down each time. The task is endless, seemingly meaningless. And yet, Camus insisted, we must imagine Sisyphus happy as he watches the stone roll down again. The joy does not lie in achieving the impossible, but in embracing the absurd with defiance-finding humor, valuing one's skill, and loving the work itself, not its outcome. Like Sisyphus, each of us pushes our own stones uphill every day, knowing that failure and death are inevitable. But far from robbing life of meaning, Sartre and Camus saw this condition as what makes human choice, perseverance, and freedom truly significant. In even the smallest acts, we can live authentically, freely, and find joy in doing so. In one of his lectures, Jean-Paul Sartre recounted a story from the time of France's occupation during World War II. The protagonist was a young student who faced a wrenching decision. Should he leave France to join the Free French forces in England and fight against the Asti Germans who had killed his brother, or should he remain at home to care for his mother? His mother lived in deep loneliness and grief, having not only lost a son, but also been abandoned by her husband, who, to make matters worse, collaborated with the enemy. For her, this remaining son was her last anchor in life. The young man understood his mother's situation and could not bear to leave her. Yet he also felt the powerful pull of patriotism, the pain of loss, and the desire to act with meaning. Sartre posed the question, in such a situation, which choice is the right, one duty to country or duty to family? Sartre rejected turning to either Christian doctrine or Kantian ethics for answers. Christianity preaches love and sacrifice, but does not specify whether one should prioritize family or nation. Kant's ethics insists that people be treated as ends, never merely as means. But here, who counts as the higher end? The lonely mother or the freedom fighters struggling for liberation? Naturally, the student sought advice from a priest. But in wartime Paris, even this question whom to ask was not straightforward. A priest sympathetic to the resistance would urge him to go, while one aligned with the collaborators would advise him to stay. The fact that one could predict the answer by choosing whom to ask revealed something deeper. Often, we seek not genuine guidance, but confirmation of what we already want. Sartre compared this to tossing a coin when torn by indecision. If the coin lands on the side we secretly did not want, our disappointment reveals our true desire. The student's case was no different. Finally, the young man turned to Sartre himself. But even this act, choosing whom to consult, was already a choice, an expression of his freedom. Sartre told him plainly, there is no universal moral code that can provide an absolute answer. He was free, and therefore he must choose or even create the path for himself. Sartre's philosophy places humanity in a world without God, a world devoid of preordained meaning. Yet the absurdity of existence does not lead to nihilism. Instead, it reminds us that we must decide how to live and bear full responsibility for our choices. It is through action and choice, renewed each day, that we shape who we are. Neither society, nor family, nor economic conditions, nor the unconscious defines us. We are the sum of our commitments, the values we affirm through our choices, and the lives we build through our freedom. Reading Existentialism Is a Humanism by Jean-Paul Sartre is like being handed both a challenge and an invitation. The challenge lies in confronting a world stripped of divine guarantees, where meaning is not given from above, but must be forged through our own actions. The invitation is to embrace freedom not as a gift, but as a responsibility that shapes who we become. What struck me most is Sartre's idea that we are condemned to be free. On the surface, it sounds harsh, even unsettling. Yet beneath it lies a profoundly empowering truth. No matter the circumstances of our birth, our background, or the limits imposed on us, we are still free to choose. Even in the face of suffering, oppression, or absurdity, we remain responsible for how we respond. and it is in these choices that our identity and values take form. Sartre's philosophy is not about despair, but about courage. It asks us to stop hiding behind excuses, be they religion, social systems, or even psychology, and to own our decisions fully. Meaning, he insists, does not exist out there, waiting to be found. It is created in the very act of living, in the commitments we make, and in the paths we carve for ourselves. For me, the lasting power of this book is its reminder that freedom is inseparable from responsibility. We cannot escape the weight of choice, but nor should we want to. It is this weight that gives our lives depth and significance. In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain, Sartre's message is both sobering and liberating. We are the authors of our own existence. So what do you think? Is meaning something we discover or something we create for ourselves? Sartre leaves the answer in our hands. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this conversation going.